3 a.m., somewhere in Montana. The Empire Builder is pushing west through the dark. Every passenger on board is asleep. The engineer at the controls has only been here for 90 minutes and will step off in 4 hours. But down the corridor, a sleeping car attendant is curled in a closet-sized bunk 2 days into the same trip, with 2 more to go. These are the longest scheduled passenger runs in America, some stretching past 60 hours, yet not a single human being takes the whole journey from start to finish. No one. The question is why? And the answer does not just explain a staffing choice. It reveals how the entire system is built. To a passenger walking down the aisle of a cross-country train, the staff appears to be a unified, permanent team. The same uniforms appear in the lounge, the same faces serve meals, and the same steady presence manages the boarding gates. It is natural to view the entire train as a single, self-contained workplace operating in harmony from departure to arrival. But this seamless environment is an illusion. In reality, the human network keeping the train in motion is constantly fracturing and rebuilding itself outside the passenger's view. A traveler buying a ticket for a multi-day trip across the continent steps into a world where the staff is divided into 2 entirely different realities. Why does a system that seems so unified on the surface depend on such a fractured human foundation? This arrangement is no mere quirk. It represents the core operating logic of long-distance rail travel in America. One group of workers lives on the train, sleeping in tight quarters and eating their meals on the move for days at a time. The other group operates on a completely different rhythm, stepping into the locomotive for just a few hours before vanishing back into the towns along the tracks, replaced by a fresh set of hands at a moment's notice. To understand why no single employee can make the full trip is to understand the physical and regulatory boundaries that govern transportation in the United States. This division governs everything on board: how schedules are calculated, where trains pause, and how the physical spaces of the cars are designed. By looking closely at this internal boundary, the true mechanics of life on the rails become clear, exposing a system of rotating shifts, hidden dormitories, and the demanding logistics of a workplace that never stops moving. 4 specific routes form the backbone of this transcontinental passenger network, tracing historical pathways across the American map. Together, they represent the last survivors of a disappearing era. True multi-day, overnight passenger trains that push both human endurance and mechanical reliability to their absolute limits. To the north, the Empire Builder runs daily between Chicago Union Station and the Pacific Northwest, covering roughly 2,250 miles of prairie and mountain terrain. East of the Cascade Mountains, in the early morning hours at Spokane, Washington, the train undergoes a complex operational split, dividing into 2 separate sections to serve both Seattle and Portland. The entire westbound journey requires 46 hours of continuous operation, crossing 5 states along the way. Further south, the California Zephyr climbs from the plains of Illinois through the heart of the Colorado Rockies and across the Sierra Nevada to Emeryville, California, just outside San Francisco. Covering 2,438 miles on tracks owned by the BNSF and Union Pacific Railroads, it is Amtrak's longest continuous single-train route, requiring more than 52 hours of travel from end to end. In the southern tier of the country, the Sunset Limited connects New Orleans to Los Angeles, crossing 1,995 miles of southern bayous, agricultural flatlands, and arid deserts. Running 3 times a week in each direction, this historic run takes approximately 46 hours to complete. But the longest transit of all belongs to the Texas Eagle. While its daily route connects Chicago to San Antonio over a 32-hour schedule, 3 days a week its coaches and sleeping cars are coupled directly to the Sunset Limited in Texas. This combined through-car service continues all the way to the Pacific Coast, creating a massive 2,728-mile journey that spans between 61 and 65 hours from origin to final destination. These schedules mean that a single train set is in constant motion for up to 3 days and nights. A passenger boarding in Chicago will watch the sun rise and set multiple times before stepping onto the platform in California or Washington State. The sheer physical geography of these routes makes the labor question unavoidable. Moving a massive steel consists across thousands of miles of host freight tracks through unpredictable weather and varying terrain requires an operational blueprint unlike any other in modern transportation. It is a scale of travel that demands a highly structured workforce where the physical boundaries of the map dictate exactly how the people on board must live and work. Every long-distance passenger train operates under a quiet division of labor, split into two separate workforce systems that rarely cross paths despite sharing the same steel tube. This division separates the employees who move the train from those who live aboard it to serve the passengers. The first group is the operating crew, consisting of the locomotive engineer and the conductor. These workers occupy the cab and the front of the train. Their sole focus is the physical movement of the massive consist, monitoring the signals, managing the brakes, and coordinating with host freight railroads. For them, the journey is broken down into highly focused short-distance runs. They do not sleep on the train, and they do not eat their meals in the dining car. When their segment of the route ends, they step off the locomotive, hand over control to a fresh crew, and go home or to a local hotel. The second group is the onboard service crew. This team includes the sleeping car attendants, the dining and cafe staff, and the chef. Their workplace is the passenger cabin, the galley, and the lounge. Unlike their counterparts in the locomotive, these employees do not rotate off at the next station. They board the train at the origin point and remain with the cars for the entire multi-day journey and the return trip. The train serves as both their workplace and their home, their dining room and their bedroom for up to a week at a time. This split creates two entirely different lifestyles within the same moving space. While the engineer looks out at the tracks ahead, measuring progress by mileposts and signals, the sleeping car attendant is making beds and greeting passengers, measuring progress by the rhythm of the dining car schedule. It is a system where one half of the workforce is constantly revolving, while the other half remains locked in place, living alongside the passengers they serve. Under federal law, the crew in the locomotive cab is bound by rigid safety limits that make an end-to-end journey legally impossible. The Federal Railroad Administration restricts passenger train employees to a maximum of 12 consecutive hours on duty. Once an engineer or conductor hits this 12-hour ceiling, they must be relieved and given at least 10 consecutive hours of rest off the train. In practice, to prevent any risk of a train being stranded mid-route due to freight delays, Amtrak schedules these operating shifts to last between 8 and 10 hours. This strict boundary has deep historical roots, tracing back to the Hours of Service Act of 1907. Congress passed this legislation to combat chronic fatigue among rail workers, following a series of fatal collisions caused by exhausted crews working 30 or 40 hours without sleep. Today, modern fatigue science and biomathematical models govern these shifts, especially for overnight operations running between 8 in the evening and 4 in the morning. But time is only part of the equation. A single crew is also limited by territorial qualification rules. Under federal regulation, an engineer cannot simply climb into a locomotive and run it over unfamiliar tracks. They must be certified for the specific segment of railroad they are operating. This certification requires detailed, documented familiarity with the physical characteristics of the line, including every signal location, track grade, curve, and local speed restriction. This knowledge is tested regularly, and engineers must make qualifying trips over the tracks to maintain their certification. Because long-distance trains run over tracks owned by various host freight railroads, like BNSF or Union Pacific, The physical requirements change from state to state. No single engineer holds qualifications for the entire length of a transcontinental route. The operational system must function as a highly coordinated relay. Every few hundred miles, at designated crew change stations like Havre, Montana, or El Paso, Texas, the train must pause. Control of the engine is handed over to a fresh team of local specialists who know the tracks ahead, allowing the incoming crew to step off the train and head to a local hotel. At division points like Havre, Montana, Sanderson, Texas, or Grand Junction, Colorado, the platform becomes a stage for a highly choreographed 3-minute ritual. As the train slows to a crawl, the incoming operating crew stands waiting on the asphalt, bags in hand, eyes fixed on the approaching cab. There is no time for small talk. The schedule demands absolute speed and efficiency. The moment the heavy steel wheels grind to a halt, the cab door swings open. The outgoing engineer and conductor descend the steep metal ladder, carrying their grip bags, federal logs, and route manuals. They step down onto a platform hundreds of miles from where their shift began, in a town that is not their home. Havre or Sanderson is simply a point on a timetable. They walk past the idling diesel engines toward a waiting crew van, which will carry them to a local contract hotel for their mandatory 10-hour rest period. While they walk away, the fresh crew climbs up into the warm cab. They adjust the seats, inspect the digital displays, and run through a mandatory safety checklist, reviewing any temporary speed restrictions on the tracks ahead. A quick radio exchange with the local dispatcher confirms the transfer of control. Within minutes of stopping, the incoming engineer releases the air brakes, notches the throttle forward, and the train starts rolling. To the passengers in the coaches or the sleeping car attendants 3 cars back, the stop is barely a pause in the trip. The service crew remains inside, their multi-day shifts completely uninterrupted. But in the locomotive, the hands on the throttle have changed. This rapid handoff is repeated dozens of times on a cross-country run, translating rigid federal rules into a kinetic, station-to-station relay that keeps the massive consist moving night and day. While the locomotive engineers step off the train to rest in local hotels, another group of workers remains locked inside the steel cars. These are the onboard service crew members, the sleeping car attendants, the chefs, the food servers, and the cafe operators. For them, there is no station-to-station relay. When they board the California Zephyr in Chicago or the Texas Eagle in San Antonio, they commit to the entire round trip. On a route like the Empire Builder, this means living and working aboard the same moving consist for 6 consecutive days. On the massive Texas Eagle through-car run to Los Angeles, the cycle lasts up to 9 days. For these employees, the train functions as a self-contained world. They sleep where they work, eat where they work, and spend their off-duty hours surrounded by the passengers they serve. Their responsibilities do not pause when night falls. A sleeping car attendant must remain available to assist passengers at any hour, managing boarding guests during midnight stops while other travelers sleep. In the galley, the chef begins preparing breakfast at 4 in the morning, working on a moving platform that sways over uneven tracks. This is a distinct way of living, where the boundary between personal life and professional duty dissolves completely. Across thousands of miles of shifting geography, these workers manage the tight physical confines of a shared rolling home. They form the permanent human core of the transcontinental run, adapting to a demanding lifestyle defined by constant motion and long separations from their families on the ground. To step out of the passenger areas and into the crew's living quarters is to enter a world designed strictly for utility. On bi-level superliner trains running across the West, Amtrak reserves a portion of a sleeper car, frequently the transition dorm car located directly behind the locomotives, solely for the onboard staff. This car is divided into tiny compartments that compress a person's entire domestic life into a space roughly the size of a standard reach-in closet. Inside a crew roomette, every square inch is engineered for survival rather than comfort. The layout is dominated by 2 narrow berths, an upper and lower bunk that fold down from the steel walls. When the beds are deployed, floor space disappears almost entirely, leaving just enough room for an adult to stand upright. In many of these rooms, there are no windows to the outside world, only the blank metal of the car body. The air smells of recycled ventilation, laundry detergent, and industrial grease, kept in motion by a small, buzzing wall fan. Here, the boundary between the working day and personal rest dissolves. A sleeping car attendant or dining car server steps off a long shift directly into this metal box, surrounded by the physical evidence of their job. Dirty uniforms hung from coat hooks, route manuals tucked under pillows, and personal bags wedged into corners. There is no physical separation from the workplace. The walls are thin enough to transmit every sound from the adjacent hallway. The heavy footsteps of other crew members, the static of radio transmissions, and the distant, muffled chatter of passengers. Beneath the mattress, the train itself is a constant physical presence. The room sits directly over the trucks, the heavy steel frames holding the wheels and axles. Every joint in the rail, every curve in the track, and every application of the air brakes translates into immediate, violent motion. The sleeper does not lie still. They sway, bounce, and vibrate as the consist climbs mountain passes or speeds across flat prairie. To close one's eyes in a crew dorm is to feel the continuous, high-frequency rattle of steel on steel vibrating through the skull, a reminder that even during sleep, the job never stops moving. The true test of endurance on a transcontinental run occurs when an employee tries to close their eyes. While the physical compression of the dorm room is difficult, the physical movement of the train presents the real obstacle. A passenger train running at 79 miles per hour does not glide smoothly. It pitches, rolls, and vibrates. Track irregularities send sudden shocks directly through the thin mattress of the crew bunk. Many of these routes run on tracks owned by freight railroads, which are maintained for heavy cargo trains rather than passenger comfort. The lateral force sweeps from side to side as the heavy steel car negotiates mountain curves, crossing switches, and worn rail joints. Even more disruptive is the phenomenon known as coupler slack. When a train accelerates or slows down, the physical space between the individual cars compresses and expands. This action creates a series of violent, metallic crashes that ripple down the length of the consist. A sleeping attendant might be jarred awake by a sudden jolt that feels like a minor collision, only to realize the engineer has simply adjusted the throttle. Hard braking events, often triggered by wildlife on the tracks or unexpected freight congestion ahead, can physically slide a sleeping crew member several inches across their berth. This physical turbulence is paired with an unnatural schedule. On a long-distance route, sleep does not align with the setting sun. The work rhythm of the train dictates when rest is permitted. A sleeping car attendant must adjust their rest windows around the immediate needs of their passengers. If a train has a scheduled stop at 2 in the morning, the attendant must be awake to open the doors, step onto the platform, and assist boarding passengers, regardless of when they last slept. In the dining car, the chef and kitchen staff operate on an even tighter timeline. Preparing breakfast for hundreds of passengers requires the galley fire to be lit by 4 in the morning. To get a few hours of sleep, these workers must retire early in the evening, often while the train is still loud with activity and passengers are walking through the corridors. Night and rest are entirely separate concepts. Sleep is a series of fragmented, negotiated windows of time grabbed whenever the schedule allows, rather than a guaranteed block of recovery. It is a constant battle against the moving machine, where the goal of 8 hours of sleep is rarely achieved in a single, uninterrupted stretch. When the train finally stops at the terminal, whether in the busy stations of Chicago or the sun-bleached platforms of Los Angeles, the onboard service crew does not head home. The end of the line is merely a halfway point. A contract crew bus carries them to a nearby partner hotel. This layover is structured recovery, a brief pause to prepare for the return trip. For 12 to 24 hours, the crew lives out of suitcases in identical commercial rooms, physically far from home and still bound to the train's schedule. Under current labor agreements, this time off the train is unpaid. The hours spent resting in the hotel do not count toward their shift, though they receive a daily federal per diem to cover meals. The quiet room is simply a temporary base, a place to wash uniforms and sleep on a stationary mattress. Soon, the cycle resets. The suitcases are packed, the crew returns to the station, and they step back onto the same train to run the entire multi-day journey in reverse. The assignment of these multi-day runs is governed by a strict, unyielding system of seniority. Twice a year, workers submit their preference bids during a process known as displacement bidding, ranking their desired routes and schedules. Those with the most years of service secure the most predictable shifts and the most desirable runs, allowing them to plan their lives on land with some degree of certainty. They earn the right to know exactly when they will leave and when they will return. For newer employees, the reality is entirely different. They are placed on the extra board, a pool of on-call workers who must remain available 24 hours a day to cover sudden vacancies, illness, or route disruptions. An extra board employee lives in a state of constant readiness, waiting for a telephone call that could send them out on a multi-day trip with only a few hours of notice. These on-call assignments are geographically restricted to their home crew base or outlying points within 130 miles, but the timing remains completely unpredictable. This system shapes entire households, turning the weekly calendar into a source of constant tension. A 7-day work cycle with only a single designated rest day makes family events and routine domestic life difficult to sustain, especially when junior employees spend years waiting to secure a regular run. The railroad ultimately filters its workforce by their patience and their tolerance for instability. A senior employee enjoys a structured, recurring schedule, while a junior worker remains at the mercy of a ringing telephone. Many passengers look at these grueling schedules and assume that living on a train yields a massive six-figure salary. The financial reality is far more modest. Under current union contracts, a starting onboard attendant earns about $22.80 an hour. Even fully tenured service staff top out around $39 an hour. To supplement this, workers receive a daily federal per diem of $151 to $210 to cover meals and expenses on the road. But for sleeping car attendants, the real margin of comfort comes from passenger tips. This tipping culture is a direct inheritance of the Pullman sleeping car legacy. In 1925, A. Philip Randolph organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters to fight low wages, eventually institutionalizing gratuities as a recognized part of railroad compensation. Today, passenger tips of $10 to $50 per room remain essential to making this mobile lifestyle viable, linking modern Amtrak employees to the very labor struggles that shaped American service on the rails. Despite these hardships, many onboard service workers choose to remain on these routes for decades. Veterans with 20 or 30 years of service on the California Zephyr or the Empire Builder build their lives around the rhythmic swaying of the cars. Over time, the route becomes a familiar territory, and the crew becomes a second family. Living together in tight spaces creates a particular culture of mutual reliance. In the narrow corridors, crew members share meals, trade stories, and manage the daily challenges of the run as a tightly knit unit. There is a quiet pride in mastering the logistics of a moving hotel and in knowing every curve and mountain pass along the line. For these workers, the train ceases to be just a workplace and becomes a professional home territory. The predictability of the rails offers a strange comfort, where the constant motion on the ground provides a sense of stability. Even when the physical toll is high and the time away from home is long, the strong camaraderie and the shared endurance of the run keep people coming back to the rails, trip after trip. Since 1971, this mobile world has steadily contracted. The national network has shrunk from over 20 long-distance routes to just 13. While public debates often focus on passenger convenience, equipment costs, or federal subsidy balances, these balance sheets overlook a broader human footprint. These remaining routes represent one of the final places in American transportation where the workplace and the home are completely integrated for days at a time. If these long-haul corridors continue to face budget pressures and potential service cuts under pending federal reauthorizations, the impact goes beyond lost transportation options for rural towns. It threatens the survival of a particular labor culture that has persisted for over a century. When a route disappears, it takes with it a community of workers who have mastered the art of living on the move, erasing a distinct way of life from the American map. The true stakes of the long-distance rail debate are not just about track mileage or arrival times. They are about whether a century-old community of mobile workers will be quietly retired, leaving behind empty tracks and a forgotten way of living on the rails. Today, the tracks spanning America sustain a disappearing way of life. While modern work moves faster, this split crew system keeps a unique industrial legacy alive. These rail workers continue to sleep, eat, and labor in constant motion. As we debate the future of passenger transit, their mobile workplace remains a vital, human connection across a vast continent. Would you ever live on the rails? Share your thoughts below.